Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris and welcome to a brand new Bionicle Fanon review, the show where I review the fan-created, canonized or non-canonized Bionicle models or just mocks in the Bionicle community that I really like and decided to rebuild and review myself. For today's topic, we are actually reviewing a contest finalist from the Bionicle Dinosaurs of Botagona Fanon contest that we held last year. This has been a long time in the making, but I am finally finishing up my reviews of the final two dinosaurs. This is the penultimate one, which is the Botagona by Jekdersnek. Okay, so this is the Botagona by Jekdersnek. It was a finalist in the Bionicle Dinosaurs of Botagona Fanon contest that we ran here on Duckbricks just last year, and this is a really cool looking lime and dark green dinosaur with some black accents all around. Altogether, this is one of the entries that really does scream Botagona to me, and it feels like this belongs in a jungle itself. Now, before we get started, I do want to note a couple of alterations I've made to the build as opposed to the original submission. First of all, the paint on the Chima Speedhorse piece right here was removed. That does make the head look a lot smoother, but I didn't really feel like removing the print off of a Lego piece, so I chose not to do that. And lastly, the tail also was supposed to have one more segment, and this was supposed to be black instead of silver. Just a couple of pieces that I could not find, and for whatever reason, did not appear in my Bricklink orders that I figured instead of having to order just those two pieces and delay the review even more, why not just call it out and continue on with the review? Otherwise, this is pretty much the exact build that you would see from the entry itself, and it is a really good one. Removing it from the turntable here, let's just take a look at the model by itself. Now, obviously, like all of our other Bionicle Fanon reviews, I will be taking a look at the model based on a few key points. Number one is posability, so we'll start off with that. Posability-wise, there's actually a little bit less posability than it may seem. You see, the way the legs are constructed is that they specifically are locked in a back and forth motion, which means that the only way that you can move the legs, at least for the upper parts of the legs, are back and forth. No, you cannot bend them outwards, you cannot really even splay them side to side. You must have it walk in a back and forth motion, almost similar to how Lego's actual T-Rexes are done, which pretty much just have that one fixed joint of articulation. Now, to be honest, this was a bit of a surprising thing when I was putting it together. I was expecting it to have a little bit more articulation than that, but I will admit, this allows it to have a much more solid stance, and basically it prevents it from having any sort of issues with falling over or supporting its own weight. Obviously, as you can see, this does support its own weight just fine. Maybe it was a little overkill to just fix the joint on one particular range of motion, but thankfully, you can really change it around and put this into different poses thanks to the multitude of joints found in the lower parts of the digitigrade legs here, where you can see that obviously you have a Hero Factory CCBS style of movable joint right here. You can move this around, you can stretch out the foot, so really there's a lot of things that you can eventually do with this. It's just that upper joint that you really can't do much with other than that one fixed degree of motion, which was again a bit surprising but not necessarily unwelcome because it does mean the model is very stable. Even when you have it very much rotated over or trying to get it into a different pose, it does stand on its 2 feet. Now, the two front arms here can be posed around. I honestly did not even notice this on the original submission until I built it myself, but it's really funny to me how the arms are almost comically small. They are the Exoforce evil robot arms, but obviously they are very, very small in comparison to the creature itself, and it definitely feels like a very unique, intentional aesthetic choice to have just two little tiny grabber arms there, almost comically small, but I kind of like what they're doing for the aesthetic, and you can actually move these around for a pretty impressive range of motion because they are mounted on a couple of different clips and bars. The head itself is mounted on a ball joint, so of course you get a lot of articulation there, and what's really cool is that if you look at the head side on, you can clearly see, and we'll talk about this more in the building techniques, how these two pieces really work together very well to have a chomping motion. Here the mouth is open, here the mouth is closed, and even with the print still there, trust me, it looks even better with the print removed, it is really clearly a cleared range of motion for the jaw to open and close, which I really appreciate. Now, in terms of the tail itself, it is fairly standard in articulation, nothing super out of the ordinary. You can swish it back and forth, you can bend it all around. There's a lot of different things that you can do with the tail itself, but for all intents and purposes, it is probably one of the most simple bits of articulation for the model itself. Overall, while it was a little disappointing to see us not able to actually bend the legs, that is very easily made up for by the fact that you can articulate a lot of the other parts of the model itself, and it's actually not that big of a deal that you can't really bend the legs further outwards or splay them out. Yes, it would be really nice to be able to display the legs more splayed outwards, but you can already angle the feet, so thankfully the feet aren't just stock still like the actual Lego molded T-Rexes. There's at least a little bit of a different thing that you can do here. Now moving onwards to building techniques, one of the things that impressed me the most about the way this model is constructed, much like many of Jekdersnek's other models, is that this has a very compact torso. Despite being built out of a multitude of different ball joints, it never feels like things are going to flex or move. It feels like there's a lot of intentionality behind which pieces are used, exactly which joints are connecting from the front Paraka leg here to the Metru leg right here. There's a lot of different types of joints used, which makes it feel like it should be bendable and flimsy, but actually acts as one very solid core, and I really do appreciate just how much effort was put into filling up all these gaps. Whether it be via the inclusion of vines reaching along the sides here, which really do add to the overall look and feel, to the inclusion of the Bionicle Star's foot and armor pieces, everything does fully come together to have a very cohesive whole. And even little details like putting in black Baraki eyes atop the Toa Metru torsos here, with the hockey skate feet elements being used on top of those to just fill all sorts of different gaps, really make this feel very finished and complete as a model itself. Now, one of the most impressive parts usages for me is the head, and the head is easily one of my favorite parts of the model itself. It is such an inspired idea to use a Legends of Chima Speedor's piece as the actual front part to a dinosaur jaw. It works so well how you can see the serrated teeth of the crocodile element meshing really nicely together with the Lego Vikings dragon element here, giving it a very unique look and feel for the jaw itself that is honestly unlike any of the other dinosaurs we've seen on this list. Of course, the usage of the Bionicle Star's Gresh armor piece is also really great for the eyebrow there. Big fan of how that turned out, and this is something that looks great from any angle. Sure, at the front it might look a little silly, but I actually really appreciate the way it looks from the front. It almost looks a little bit more friendly and cute from the front itself, versus from the side where it looks a bit more menacing and ready for battle. So really, depending on which way you want to pose this, it looks really good for the head itself. And this is again one of the most impressive heads that I've seen out of all of the Dino Fanon contest finalists. Now moving on for the rest of the build, it is honestly fairly simple besides the torso and head. There's pretty simple construction being used, standard CCBS joints coming together for the tail. Same with the legs here. Fairly simple, so nothing too crazy is going on, but I really do appreciate just how aesthetically clean this is. And that brings us to the third point, which is aesthetics. Now, aesthetically speaking, this is incredibly instantly recognizable as a dinosaur-like creature. You've got the tail, you've got the legs, it almost feels like a cross between a T-Rex and a raptor, and this definitely does feel like a dinosaur that could exist in the Bionicle world. To me, what's really strong about this model is the color scheme. There's a lot of black being used for the inner core, but as you go further and further outwards, the lime green almost feels like a lighter shade of scale atop of the darker green underside of the skin, and then you go to the darker black parts, which are even more deeper into the body itself, and I do feel like, again, there's a lot of intentionality in which pieces were used for the color scheme itself. Overall, very happy with the aesthetics of this model, and it is really a joy to play around with and pose with all the other dinos. And finally, bringing us to the last point, I want to bring alongside a standard Agori and Glatorian. We have Akar here and Ranu, just to do a few size comparisons with what this looks like next to some of the other denizens of people who might be exploring Botagona. Now, obviously, as you can see, this scales very nicely against both of them. The scale does feel a little bit wonky when it's next to a Glatorian character, where it kind of feels like they're around the same size. It's not quite large enough for the Glatorian to ride it, but it's not quite small enough for it to be maybe a smaller sort of creature. They're kind of comparable in terms of size, but maybe you can imagine that there are different versions of this. Maybe there are adult ones that are bigger, there are child ones that are smaller, and this feels like a good in-between. However, this is pretty much perfect for an Agori like Ranu to ride, so if you actually want to put him on top here, you can get a really fun look of somebody actually riding the dinosaur itself, which is something I really wanted to do with all these dinosaurs, was actually put someone on top of them to ride them. And this is really just a lot of fun to be able to put a character atop its back. You can technically do it with the Glatorian as well, but it is a little bit more awkward to try to place them on top. It almost feels like since they are so close in size that it's kind of buckling under the weight, but I think it works out well. You can kind of imagine and use your imagination to make it work as a rideable steed. But overall, I do feel like the aesthetic is very strong. You still have that Bionicle aesthetic with pistons and Bionicle elements being used, with a bit more of a nature-like organic aspect being integrated with these CCBS shells and the smoothness of the Chima armor and the Viking's jaw. Overall, I think it's now time to summarize my thoughts on the model itself, and in terms of aesthetics, I am really happy with the aesthetics. Honestly, I probably would bring this at around a 9 out of 10, specifically only because you cannot bend these legs outwards. That does feel like a bit of a miss for me, even though I said it wasn't a huge deal. I definitely feel like, especially looking straight on, like if you look at it from this angle, these legs, the upper legs, feel very widely spaced out, and the fact that you can't really move them around or do anything to fix that is, in my opinion, a bit of a con, although admittedly not a major one. Everything else about it, though, is fantastic. Posability is phenomenal, building techniques are great, aesthetics are pretty fantastic as well, love that color scheme, so believability in universe, I'm gonna have to give that one a 9 out of 10. Also, the usage of CCBS primarily on the back here does feel a little bit jarring compared to the rest of the Bionicle stuff, but overall, very happy with how it looks, and I am a big fan of CCBS and its uses. And in terms of building techniques, this to me is an easy 10 out of 10. The way the parts usages are done for the upper and lower jaws are so smart. I love the way the torso is built, and yes, the legs can't really be splayed out, but that's more for stability purposes, at least as far as I can tell. Overall, this is to me one of the strongest entries from the Dinosaurs of Botagona Fanon contest list. It was an absolute joy to build and recreate and review for all of you, and definitely go check out Jekdersnek, linked in the description below if you want to see more builds like this. Alright, and with that we have summed up our review of the Botagona. Let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of this model? Do you think maybe this one should have won? How do you think it placed amongst the other finalists? I hope you enjoyed this review, and thank you all so much for everybody who have participated in these Fanon contests. They are so much fun to put together and to run, and just seeing the amazing amount of creativity from around the community is just so cool to see folks coming together and really building and being creative here. So thank you all so much for folks for doing that. Happy to have another Bionicle dinosaur in my collection, and stay tuned because the final dinosaur review is coming very soon. Thanks so much, and bye for now.